My friends canceled our vacation last minute, but I found out they still went without me. The group chat had been buzzing for months. A 5-day beach vacation was supposed to be the perfect escape. 4 friends, 1 house by the ocean, and endless plans for lazy afternoons and seafood dinners. Flights were booked, the rental was secured, and every detail, from snacks for the road trip to sunscreen brands, had been meticulously discussed. But a week before departure, Liz was the first to drop out. A work conflict, something unavoidable with a big client. Her text was apologetic, sprinkled with promises to make it up to everyone. 2 days later, Mike followed suit. His explanation was vaguer, a family thing that he didn't elaborate on. By then, the energy in the group chat had shifted. Plans felt half-hearted, conversations shorter. Then Jess called, her voice softer than usual, explaining that her sister had a health scare and her parents needed her support. Within the span of 5 days, the trip unraveled completely. The group chat went silent. Plans were paused indefinitely, and the excitement that had built over months fizzled into disappointment. The suitcase stayed unpacked in the corner of the bedroom. Refunds were processed, flights canceled, and the weekend was reshaped into something quieter. Movie marathons, takeout, and scrolling endlessly through social media feeds. Saturday evening stretched on, heavy with the kind of stillness that only comes from canceled plans. The hum of the television filled the room while the phone vibrated nearby. The weekend felt like a void, silent and unremarkable. The half-packed suitcase had been shoved into the closet, and takeout containers cluttered the coffee table. The group chat remained untouched, its last messages frozen in time. Around 8 p.m. on Saturday, boredom crept in. The phone was picked up out of habit, and after a moment of hesitation, Mike's name was tapped. He answered after a few rings, but the noise in the background made it hard to hear him clearly. There was music, upbeat and unmistakably loud, and the sound of laughter layered beneath it. "Hey!" Mike's voice was slightly breathless, as though he'd been caught off guard. "What's up? Where are you?" There was a pause, barely a second, but enough to register. "Oh, family thing. You know how it is." The music spiked in volume, and someone in the background shouted something unintelligible. Mike must have moved somewhere quieter because the noise muffled slightly, though faint sounds of waves, actual waves, could still be heard. "Family thing?" The words were repeated back, more out of reflex than anything else. "Yeah, kind of a last-minute gathering. Anyway, what's up?" Mike's voice was rushed now, impatient. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Nothing. Just checking in." Cool. "Listen, I gotta go, but let's catch up soon, yeah?" The call ended before a response could be formed. The phone stayed in hand for a moment longer. The noise in the background, the music, the waves, the faint bursts of laughter, replayed on a loop in memory. It wasn't a family gathering. It was a party somewhere coastal. The pieces started falling into place, heavy and sharp. The call with Mike had planted a seed of suspicion, and no amount of pacing around the apartment could shake it loose. The faint sound of waves and distant music kept replaying in memory, impossible to dismiss. The group chat remained quiet, its final messages frozen in time. Liz's overly apologetic excuse, Mike's vague family emergency, Jess's soft, almost hesitant explanation. All of them felt suddenly weightless. Sunday morning came with the same gnawing feeling, and eventually, Jess's number was dialed. She answered quickly, too quickly, and her voice was unusually bright. In the background, faint noise carried through, wind, bursts of chatter, and something unmistakable. Waves rolling in steady patterns. Her words were fast, filling every pause with unnecessary chatter. It wasn't natural. It was the sound of someone trying to fill cracks in a crumbling wall. The background noise shifted, and a familiar voice called out faintly, one that sounded like Liz. Jess brushed it off clumsily, her voice tight, her attempt to explain empty and brittle. The call ended soon after, her exit abrupt and unconvincing. The phone screen dimmed, but the realization had already settled in. 2 calls. The same faint waves. The same distant laughter. 2 rushed conversations, stitched together with flimsy excuses. They weren't scattered across different cities, stuck at work, or tending to family emergencies. They were together. At the beach. Every detail of their stories unraveled, each thread falling apart in slow motion. They had gone on the trip, and they had decided it would be better if one person stayed behind. The phone stayed clenched in one hand, thumb hovering over Jess's contact. Calling again felt desperate, but sitting with the silence was unbearable. The anger had started simmering somewhere deep, slowly spreading until it was impossible to keep it down. Without overthinking, the call went through. Jess picked up after a few rings. Her voice was hesitant this time, softer, like she already knew what was coming. "Where are you right now?" The words came out sharp, cutting straight through any pretense. There was a pause, short, but loud with meaning. Then she sighed. "You're at the beach, aren't you?" Jess didn't deny it. There was only more silence. The anger snapped. Words spilled out fast, sharp-edged and shaking. About trust, about months of planning, about being lied to so effortlessly. About sitting at home, eating microwave dinners, while they were all together pretending like one person just didn't matter enough to include. Jess finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't my idea." The line crackled with static, but the words hit their target. "It wasn't anyone's idea, Jess. You all agreed to this. You all let it happen." In the background, faint voices could be heard. Mike's laugh, Liz saying something muffled. They were close, nearby. Jess started to say something else, but the call ended before she could finish. The phone was tossed onto the couch, breath coming in sharp bursts. Anger, embarrassment, and something uglier. Humiliation, burned under the skin. They had planned this together. They had decided, collectively, to cut one person out and carry on like it didn't matter. Any chance of pretending this could still be fixed had been shattered. The silence after the call didn't last long. Sitting around wasn't an option. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose threads left dangling. Scrolling through social media felt like the obvious next step. Liz's profile, quiet. Mike's, nothing new. Jess, empty. They were being careful, but people are never that careful. After some digging, a photo popped up from a mutual friend's account. A golden sunset, the ocean stretching wide in the background, and someone half-cropped out of the frame wearing bracelets that looked suspiciously like Jess's. The caption was simple: "Best weekend getaway clinking glasses." The geotag pinned it perfectly: a small beach town, the exact one the group had been planning for months. The phone was still in hand when a new message lit up the screen. It wasn't from Jess or Mike or Liz. It was from a coworker. "Hey, funny thing. I thought I saw Liz at that beach resort you guys were planning to go to. Are you there too?" The message hit like a bucket of cold water. No more second-guessing. No more excuses. They were there. All of them. Together. The rest of the day was filled with fragmented thoughts and restless energy. Calling again felt pointless. They weren't going to pick up. But the weight of being cut out was impossible to sit with. By late afternoon, the decision was made. There would be no waiting for them to explain themselves. Screenshots were taken. The blurry photo, the geotag, the coworker's text. Every piece of proof lined up neatly. The group chat was opened, and without hesitation, each screenshot was dropped into the thread, followed by a single message. "You could have just told me the truth." The screen stayed bright as the messages were marked as read. No typing bubble appeared. No one responded. But there was no going back now. The screenshots hung in the group chat like a grenade with the pin pulled. Each message marked read, but none were answered. Hours passed, the phone sitting face up on the coffee table, its silence louder than any notification chime. Later that night, Jess broke first. Her name lit up the screen, and the message preview was long. Paragraphs stacked on top of each other. It was full of explanations that didn't explain, apologies that didn't apologize. Words like, "It wasn't supposed to be like this," and "We didn't mean to hurt you," jumped out from the blur of text. Mike followed next. His response was shorter, clipped, the tone defensive in some parts and regretful in others. He mentioned miscommunication, how things had spiraled, how they'd convinced themselves that it was better this way. Liz said nothing. Her silence felt heavier than the words from the other two combined. But explanations didn't matter now. They had already packed their bags, driven to the beach, and poured their drinks, all while knowing they'd left someone behind. Sleep didn't come that night. The phone stayed nearby, flipped face down this time. Notifications ignored. By morning, a notification popped up from the same mutual friend who'd posted the blurry beach photo. Another story had gone up, this one showing the three of them together at a bonfire, drinks in hand, Jess leaning into Liz's shoulder, Mike laughing at something out of frame. The caption read, "The perfect weekend with my favorite people, yellow heart sparkles." There was no way to misinterpret it. Later that day, Jess sent another message. It was shorter, like she had run out of excuses. Please, can we talk? In person? For a moment, the thought lingered. A face-to-face conversation, hearing their voices, letting them try to justify something that felt so fundamentally unjustifiable. But then the phone was turned off. They had already said everything they needed to say, not with words, but with choices. The phone stayed off for 2 days. No notifications, no incoming calls, no reminders of voices that once felt familiar. When it was finally turned back on, there were missed calls, mostly from Jess. A few voicemails sat there, untouched, like unopened letters from people who no longer felt real. But Liz's name wasn't there. The silence from her said more than words ever could be. Why midweek? Jess showed up unannounced. The knock on the door was hesitant, followed by a faint, "It's me." Opening the door felt like peeling off a scab. Deliberate, painful, but necessary. Jess stood there, her face pale, shoulders slumped forward like she'd been carrying something heavy. She tried to explain how things just happened, how no one wanted to hurt anyone, how the decision felt smaller in the moment than it turned out to be. Her voice cracked more than once, and her eyes stayed glued to the floor. It didn't matter. The apologies, the regret, the shakiness in her voice, they couldn't reverse what had already been done. "You could have told me," was the only response given. Jess nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes, but there was nothing left to say. After a few more broken sentences and empty spaces where words should have been, she left. The door closed softly behind her, and the air felt still again. Days turned into weeks. Mike never reached out again. Liz stayed silent, her absence a glaring reminder of how fragile some bonds are, no matter how long they've existed. There was no dramatic conclusion, no grand revelation. Just a quiet fading out, like a song slowly turning down until only static remained. Months later, while passing a coffee shop, Liz was spotted through the window, laughing with someone unfamiliar. Her head tilted back, eyes bright, like nothing had ever happened. The instinct to stop, to walk in and demand an explanation, flickered for half a second before fading completely. Some friendships don't end in fiery arguments. They dissolve, bit by bit, choice by choice, until there's nothing left to salvage. In the end, they made their choice, and walking away was mine.